Avoidants live with a quiet assumption that gives them emotional security, the belief that no matter how far they pull away, no matter how silent they become, no matter how long they take to think, you will eventually reach out. They depend on this more than they admit even to themselves. It's not because they see you as weak or desperate, but because they have unconsciously programmed their mind to expect you to be the bridge. In their internal world, they convince themselves that you are the one who cares more, tries harder, and values the connection enough to always close the emotional distance they create. So when you go silent, they don't panic at first. They assume it's temporary. They assume you're giving them space. They expect the silence to break on your time's side, not theirs. They think they know exactly when you'll reach out because you've done it before. But then something unexpected happens. Your silence lasts longer than they predicted, longer than their timeline allowed, longer than their ego expected. And that moment, that exact moment, is where their illusion of control begins to crumble. Because avoidants operate emotionally from a place of control. They feel safer when they believe they're the ones managing the distance, managing the timing, managing the intensity. It allows them to feel in charge of their emotional exposure. But when your silence extends beyond the point they mentally set, they feel something they never anticipated: uncertainty. This uncertainty doesn't come like a wave. It comes like a whisper, a quiet shift inside them, a tightening in their chest they can't explain, a sudden awareness that they don't know what you're thinking anymore, that they can't predict your next move, that maybe, just maybe, you have stopped waiting. This uncertainty grows in the background of their thoughts, slowly destabilizing the emotional script they relied on. They feel less confident, less sure, less in control. And for an avoidant, loss of control is one of the deepest emotional triggers. They start noticing how empty their phone feels without your messages. They start noticing the silence more than they noticed your presence. They start checking if you've been active. They start wondering why you haven't broken the silence. Their mind becomes restless because silence is only comfortable for them when they believe it's temporary, when they choose it. But when silence isn't theirs to control, it becomes threatening, disorienting, and emotionally activating. Their illusion of control shatters further when they realize they miscalculated you. They underestimated your resilience. They misread your strength. They assumed you would chase eventually, that you would soften, that you would break. But when you don't, when you stay centered in your silence, they feel something rare inside them, the awareness that you're no longer emotionally tied to their patterns. This awareness can shake them more deeply than any argument ever did. They feel the shift not because you said anything, but because your silence speaks differently this time. It feels grounded, not reactive. It feels peaceful, not angry. It feels self-focused, not connection-focused. And that terrifies them, because avoidants are used to silences that end with reconciliation. But your silence doesn't feel like a pause. It feels like a boundary. This is when their mind begins spiraling with thoughts they had pushed away for months. Did they move on? Are they done with me? Did I push too far this time? Are they finally seeing their worth? Did they realize I wasn't giving anything? These questions break the illusion that they were in control of the distance. They start realizing the silence isn't a tool they are using. It is a mirror showing them their own behavior. Your silence holds a power they didn't expect. It shifts the emotional scales. It disrupts the dynamic. It forces them into a position they've avoided their whole life, a position where they are the one wondering, doubting, missing, overthinking. They feel the first crack in the emotional shield they built around themselves. And it all starts with a silence that lasted longer than they believed you were capable of. This is the moment their confidence in their emotional control collapses, and the moment their heart begins to awaken to the truth of what they really feel. There comes a moment in your silence where something shifts inside the avoidant, a moment they never prepared for, never accounted for, and never believed would happen. At first, they tell themselves your silence is temporary. They assume it's just a pause, a small emotional break, a normal reaction to the distance they created. They think you're taking a breath, calming down, waiting for them, or simply letting the dust settle. They see your silence as a momentary quiet, not a meaningful shift. But as time passes, as the silence stretches longer than they predicted, something in their perception changes. It stops feeling like a pause and starts feeling like a turning point, and this realization hits them harder than they ever expected. Avoidants are comfortable with pauses, they're used to them. Pauses don't scare them. Pauses feel predictable, safe, manageable. But when your silence becomes longer, calmer, steadier, and more grounded than they imagined, it starts to feel different. It's not the silence of someone waiting. It's not the silence of someone hurting. It's not the silence of someone punishing them. It's the silence of someone shifting. Someone redirecting their energy inward instead of toward the avoidant. Someone detaching in a way that feels peaceful rather than reactive. This kind of silence is powerful because it carries weight, the weight of someone who has emotionally stepped back for themselves, not because of the avoidant. That difference rattles them. It's unfamiliar. It's unsettling. It forces them to see the connection through a different lens. And this is when the avoidant begins to feel something they didn't expect. The silence is no longer something you are doing times because of them. Times it is something you are doing times for yourself. Asterisk. That subtle shift threatens the emotional dynamic they were relying on. Because as long as your silence was temporary, they were safe. As long as you were emotionally anchored to them, they felt secure. But when your silence begins to feel like acceptance rather than waiting, their internal alarm starts ringing. They begin noticing your energy feels different. Your absence doesn't feel tense, it feels peaceful. Your distance doesn't feel emotional, it feels intentional. Your silence doesn't sound like hurt, it sounds like clarity. And because avoidants read energy more accurately than people think, this shift hits them deeply. They sense that you are not clinging anymore. They sense that you are not replaying the last conversation. They sense that you are not drowning in sadness. Instead, they feel something worse for them. You might be outgrowing the emotional space they once held in your life. This is where the panic begins, quietly at first. They start checking their phone more often, even if they don't admit it. They look for signs that you're still emotionally available. They replay the last moments you shared, trying to understand what changed. They scroll through old messages, searching for clues. They get caught in loops of overthinking, trying to figure out whether your silence is distance, healing, or indifference. And the more they analyze, the more they realize something they didn't want to face. They no longer feel certain that you're coming back. Your silence becomes the turning point, not because it hurts them instantly, but because it creates a shift in power, awareness, and emotional meaning. It reveals that they don't have the emotional control they thought they did. It reveals that their avoidance didn't freeze your world, it freed you. It reveals that the silence they thought would protect them now threatens the connection they never admitted mattered so much. They begin questioning themselves, not you. Did I misread their feelings? Did they finally see my pattern? Have they lost interest? Did I push them too far? These questions chip away at the emotional detachment they hide behind. And the truth they slowly begin to accept is this: your silence is not a waiting room anymore. It's a crossroads, a shift, a transformation, a turning point that they never expected and cannot control. This is when the meaning of your silence changes inside their mind. It stops being a pause they're comfortable with. It becomes a signal that the emotional balance has changed. It becomes evidence that you're no longer reacting from hurt, but responding from strength. It becomes the moment they realize you are not stuck in the place they left you, you have moved forward. And that realization unsettles them more than any message you could ever send. Your silence becomes the turning point that forces them to confront their own feelings, their own behavior, and their own fear. It wakes them up in a way nothing else could, because it shows them that the one thing they believed would always stay no longer feels guaranteed. There is a moment in your silence that hits an avoidant harder than anything you ever said, harder than any argument you ever had, harder than any emotional confession you ever shared. It's the moment they suddenly sense, not guess, not imagine, but feel times that you might actually be done. Avoidants don't panic when you cry. They don't panic when you plead. They don't panic when you explain your feelings over and over. Those reactions fit into a pattern they know. But silence, true silence, grounded silence, peaceful silence triggers something much deeper inside them. It shakes the part of them that always believed you would come back. It cracks the confidence they had in your emotional availability. And once that crack appears, everything inside them starts to shift. At first, the panic is subtle. It doesn't come as a dramatic emotional outburst. It comes as a restlessness, a sudden awareness that something feels off. They start feeling uncomfortable in their own space. They notice the absence of your energy in ways they didn't expect. They open their phone hoping to see a message. They scroll through conversations, replaying moments that felt safe, moments where you reached for them, moments where they felt wanted without having to ask. They check your profile. They look for signs that you're still emotionally there. The silence makes their mind louder, and the louder their mind gets, the more they start spiraling into thoughts they usually avoid. The panic grows as they realize you're not reacting, you're not chasing, you're not checking on them, you're not breaking the silence like you always did. This confuses them because for the first time, they don't know where you stand. Avoidants feel safest when they can predict your emotional behavior. Predictability gives them control. Control gives them emotional safety. But when your silence becomes unpredictable, when it lasts longer than their timeline, that safety collapses. Suddenly, they are left with questions they can't answer quickly. Are they upset with me? Did I go too far? Did I misjudge them? Are they moving on? Did I make a mistake? These questions start looping in their mind, and the more they think, the more unsettled they feel. This panic is internal, private, and hidden. They won't show it. They won't tell anyone. They won't admit it even to themselves at first. Instead, they'll become quieter, more distant, more reflective. They might distract themselves more aggressively, trying to bury the discomfort. But distraction doesn't work the same way anymore. Every small reminder of you, a song, a routine, an inside joke, a place you mentioned, pulls them back into the spiral. Their emotions start catching up to them, slowly but powerfully, because avoidants don't feel things instantly, they feel them delayed. And your silence is the emotional catalyst that speeds up that delayed reaction. The panic becomes stronger when they realize you were never the unstable one they were. You were never too much, they were too withdrawn. You were never overwhelming, they were too afraid. And now, the silence they once thought protected them is forcing them to face truths they avoided. This internal collapse is unsettling because it challenges their self-image. They always believed they were in control of their feelings, immune to emotional shifts, detached enough to not be affected. But when they feel fear, genuine fear at the thought of losing you, that self-image breaks. They suddenly understand that their avoidance didn't keep them safe, it just kept them blind. Your silence becomes the mirror that shows them the emotional consequences of their distance. They start regretting things they dismissed. They start thinking about the moments they brushed off your feelings. They start remembering the times you reached for them and they pushed you away. And each memory hits them harder because now those moments feel like evidence of their own role in creating this silence. That realization doesn't bring clarity. It brings guilt, fear, and longing. And the panic continues to grow because for the first time, they feel powerless. They can't predict you. They can't read you. They can't rely on the old pattern. They can't control the timing. They can't assume your next move. This emotional uncertainty is more terrifying to an avoidant than vulnerability itself. Because vulnerability exposes them, but losing someone exposes the truth they fear most, that they cared more than they admitted. This internal panic marks the moment your silence becomes something they can no longer ignore. It becomes the emotional shift that forces them to reevaluate the connection, reevaluate themselves, and reevaluate what they truly want. And underneath all that panic lies the one feeling they tried hardest to avoid, the fear of losing someone who mattered more than their silence could protect them from. There comes a point in your silence where the avoidant is no longer thinking about the last argument, the last message, or the last moment you shared. Instead, they begin replaying the times, entire relationship times in their mind, not the way it looked on the outside, but the way it times felt times on the inside. And what hits them hardest are not the dramatic moments, not the tears, not the confrontations. What hits them are the soft moments they once dismissed, the tenderness they overlooked, the patience they took for granted, the stability they never acknowledged. They start remembering the things you did out of love, not out of need. And these memories hit them with a force they never expected, because silence has a way of amplifying what they ignored. At first, these flashbacks show up quietly. A random moment you laughed with them, the way you looked at them when you thought they weren't paying attention, a time you stayed patient while they shut down, the softness in your voice when you asked how their day was, the way you quietly made space for them without demanding anything in return. These moments come back to them with a different emotional weight now. They're no longer just memories, they are reminders of the emotional safety you offered, the safety they didn't know how to receive. They start remembering the times you tried to understand them when they couldn't even understand themselves, how you listened without judgment, how you tried to decode their silences, how you reached for them even when they pushed you away, how you stayed emotionally grounded even when the connection felt unstable. These were the moments that made them feel seen in ways they weren't prepared for, but they didn't appreciate them fully in the moment because they were too focused on protecting themselves. But your silence changes the meaning of those memories. It makes them realize what they had, what they were given, what they didn't give back. They begin feeling guilt, not because you're punishing them, but because for the first time, the noise of the world is gone and all they can hear are the echoes of your effort. And that echo hits them like a truth they can't outrun. Then the memories get deeper. They recall the pain in your eyes on days when you tried to hold everything together. They remember the moments when you tried to communicate your needs gently, hoping they'd understand. They remember you trying to love them in a way that didn't suffocate them, in a way that honored their fear but still invited connection. These memories expose something they never faced before. You weren't asking for too much. You were giving too much. Their mind begins replaying conversations they once brushed off. You telling them you felt alone, you expressing concern, you trying to share your heart. At the time, they told themselves you were emotional, dramatic, or overthinking. But now, with distance and silence, those memories feel different. They feel truthful. They feel heavy. They feel like evidence of how deeply you cared while they were too afraid to show that they cared too. And then the flashbacks turn inward. They begin remembering their own behavior, the moments they shut down when you needed them present, the times they didn't respond when you reached out, the days they chose silence over vulnerability. These memories don't come like guilt trips, they come like realizations of how their fear turned into avoidance. Realizations of how their coping mechanisms pushed away the one person who offered genuine love. Realizations that they participated in the emotional distance, not because you failed, but because they were afraid of being loved too deeply. This emotional replay is painful for them because it dismantles the stories they told themselves, that you were too emotional, that they were too independent. That space was always the answer. That time would reset everything. But now, looking back through the lens of silence, they see the truth they avoided. You were giving softness, safety, and stability, things they silently craved, but didn't know how to receive without feeling overwhelmed. Every small memory starts carrying a meaning it didn't carry before. Every moment of patience looks like effort. Every act of kindness looks like love. Every moment of silence from them now looks like avoidance. And every attempt from you looks like emotional courage. And the longer the silence lasts, the louder these memories get. They no longer replay the things you did wrong, they replay the things you did right. They no longer defend their distance, they question it. They no longer justify their actions, they regret them. These emotional flashbacks don't hurt them because you're gone. They hurt because, for the first time, they finally understand what you were offering, and how much they didn't show up to receive. One of the most jarring moments for an avoidant, the moment that actually shakes them awake, is when they finally see the truth about who you were versus who they times told themselves times you were. Avoidants build emotional narratives in their mind to protect themselves. They convince themselves you were too emotional, too intense, too available, too dependent, too expressive, too invested. These labels aren't about you, they are about their fear. These labels make it easier for them to justify their distance. They help them believe that pulling away is logical, necessary, even healthy. As long as they see you through a distorted lens, they don't have to confront their own emotional limitations. But silence, especially silence that lasts longer than expected, dissolves that lens, and for the first time, they truly see you. It starts slowly. They begin noticing the reality of how you handled things. The more they reflect, the more they realize you weren't clingy, you were consistent. You weren't needy, you were emotionally invested. You weren't overwhelming, you were communicating. You weren't demanding, you were trying. They start to see moments where they thought you were too much, and now those same moments look like patience, softness, and understanding. They replay conversations where you expressed your worries, and now they sound like truth, not pressure. They recall the times you reached out, and now those moments feel like effort, not burden. As the silence stretches, the old story they told themselves collapses. They can no longer hide behind the narrative that you were the unstable one. It becomes undeniable that you were the one holding the emotional balance. You were the one creating safety. You were the one who understood them, even when they didn't understand themselves. They see it clearly now. They weren't pulling away because you were overwhelming, they were pulling away because they were afraid. They were protecting themselves, not from you, but from the vulnerability that your presence brought out in them. This realization is deeply uncomfortable. It forces them to confront the fact that they misjudged you, that they misread your intentions, that they blamed you for emotional intensity they didn't know how to handle within themselves. And now, in the quiet, there's no distortion left, no emotional noise, no excuses, just clarity, and that clarity exposes the truth. You were not too much. They were too guarded. They begin comparing you to the people who came before, the ones who hurt them, confused them, abandoned them, or pressured them, and they start to see how different you actually were. You didn't punish them for withdrawing. You didn't try to control them. You didn't demand emotional performances. You didn't suffocate them. You simply tried to love them in the safest, gentlest way you knew. This contrast hits them hard, because now they realize they pushed away the one person who wasn't recreating their past trauma. They also start to see their own pattern more clearly. They recognize the moments when they ghosted, shut down, deflected, or avoided conversations. Before, they justified those behaviors by telling themselves they were protecting their peace. But now, in the silence, those same moments feel different. They don't look like self-protection anymore, they look like emotional avoidance. They don't look like boundaries, they look like fear. They don't look like strength, they look like escape. This comparison between who they thought you were and who you actually were forces them into an emotional confrontation with themselves. They start feeling guilt for the times they invalidated your feelings. They regret brushing off your emotional honesty. They replay the softness you offered and realize how rare it was. Your silence becomes the backdrop that reveals the truth. They didn't lose someone who was demanding, they lost someone who was valuable. The most powerful part of this realization is when they start understanding your strength. They see that the silence you're choosing isn't a reaction, it's a reflection of your worth. They thought you were dependent on them emotionally, but now your silence shows independence they didn't expect. They thought you needed constant reassurance, but now your peace shows emotional stability they overlooked. They thought you would always return, but now your distance shows boundaries they never believed you could set. And this hits them deeper than any argument ever could, because they finally see that the version of you they created in their mind was an illusion designed to protect them from intimacy. And the version they failed to see, the real you, was someone capable, loving, grounded, compassionate, and emotionally mature. The shock is not just realizing who you truly were. The shock is realizing they only understood your worth when you were no longer revealing it. There is a moment in your silence where everything finally lands inside the avoidant, not just the memories, not just the confusion, not just the fear, but the truth. And that truth is brutal, because it forces them to confront something they have spent their entire life running from, losing someone who mattered more than their avoidance could ever protect them from. Avoidants move through relationships with the subconscious belief that distance keeps them safe, that detachment keeps them in control, that silence keeps the emotional world manageable. But when your silence becomes stronger, calmer, and longer than anything they expected, their internal story collapses, and what rises in its place is the painful realization of what they truly lost. At first they think they're fine. Avoidants always do. They lean into distractions, routines, the numbness they've mastered over the years. They tell themselves that silence is good. That space is what they wanted. That distance is what they needed. They believe that the quiet will help them reset emotionally. But as time passes, and your silence no longer resembles waiting, their inner world begins to change. The silence that once felt safe now feels suffocating. The distance that once felt protective now feels empty. And the absence they once handled easily now feels like a growing wound they don't know how to soothe. They start noticing how different life feels without your presence balancing their emotional edges. They notice how their days feel quieter, not peaceful but hollow. They notice how small things remind them of you: routines, sounds, emojis, inside jokes, the way certain moments used to feel softer because you existed in them. These realizations cut deeper than they expect, because avoidants don't feel gradually, they feel suddenly. Their delayed emotional processing catches up all at once, and when it hits like a storm. And then the truth begins unfolding in layers. They realize your presence wasn't overwhelming, it was grounding. They realize your consistency wasn't clinginess, it was loyalty. They realize your emotional expression wasn't pressure, it was honesty. They realize your effort wasn't neediness, it was love. They begin to understand that the connection didn't fall apart because you asked for too much, but because they offered too little. And this realization hurts, because it makes them see that they weren't the calm, rational one, they were the fearful one. Your silence becomes the mirror they avoided looking into for months or even years. It reflects back the truth about their distance. It shows them the emotional cost of their avoidance. It reveals the gap between what they wanted and what they were willing to give. They begin to see how their fear robbed them of the one thing they secretly craved, a relationship where they felt safe enough to stay. And as that understanding grows, so does the grief. They grieve the moments they shut down instead of opening up. They grieve the chances they didn't take. They grieve the words they never said. They grieve the love they didn't express. They grieve the version of you that loved them before silence taught you how to love yourself. The deepest realization hits them when they finally understand why losing you hurts more than the silence ever protected them. Avoidance gave them temporary relief, but losing someone who saw their heart beneath the fear creates a pain they can't numb. For the first time, they see that silence didn't save them, it cost them. It cost them emotional closeness. It cost them stability. It cost them a partner who tried. It cost them a presence that made their life feel less lonely. And now, as they sit in the silence they once chose, they feel the full weight of what they pushed away. What hurts them most is not that you're gone. It's that you didn't leave in anger, you left in peace. And peace is harder to fight than conflict. Your silence teaches them something they never wanted to learn. You can lose someone not because they stopped loving, but because they finally started loving themselves. And once this realization settles in their chest, it becomes the moment they understand that the silence they used to rely on is the same silence that changed everything.